Let's do this. Welcome, firstly. Thanks to Betfair. I'm Tom Haylock and Ben Douglas, which many of you, probably all of you, will know. Welcome to the World Cup, Soccer World Cup, obviously analytical meetup with Professor David Sumpter. Great of you to join us. And just I want to start a little bit about Betfair and what we are trying to achieve at Betfair and what these things mean to us as well as you all listening. So Betfair's very big on two things, education and community. And that's what these sessions are about. So we're about creating and championing winning, hard to get out. And it's the beauty of the exchange. We can actually encourage winning as opposed to corporate bookmakers. So that's partly why we do these educational pieces. And the second piece is community. Community is huge for us, and we encourage in-person or online events. We encourage networking. Many of you would have seen the Slack channels and the quants groups, and in person as well, face-to-face functions, which is fantastic for us at Betfair because knowledge, it's all about knowledge and sharing knowledge. And the longer we can do that, the more sustainable Betfair is and the more sustainable our clients are. So that is a huge piece of the puzzle for us. And we love having everyone here tonight, and we'd love to see you all in person if you can make in-person events as well. So Mitch will share the Quants Slack community link as well, so you can have a look at that. Some of you may be aware, but probably not. It's Gambling Harm Awareness Week. And what that means for us, obviously, we're talking about education and trying to harness winning and promote winning activity. But it's an important week, and we champion that at Betfair as well, gambling wisely, safely, and responsibly. So if you have any questions about that, obviously we encourage gambling responsibly. I'm sure most of everyone here will be educated in what that means, but any issues, gamble responsibly. There's a number 1-800-858-858 you can tune into as well. So encourage you to reach out and gamble responsibly. That's the big message. If you'd like to chat with the automation team as well, we've got Ben Douglas and Mitch as well, automation@betfair.com.au. So tune in and message us any questions along the way. Ben's always a great resource. He's happy to help, and he will chat with you all about that. I can't wait to get into what this night is about with Professor David Sumpter. There's question and answer Q&A throughout the night, so encourage you to jump in with plenty of questions as we go. Really excited about this guest. He's an expert in applying mathematical analysis to soccer, football, whatever you may call it. In the lead up, obviously, the 2022 FIFA World Cup, it's going to be a huge event, and it's a huge event for Betfair, but globally as well. So I can't wait to get stuck in. Is there any more to do? Get stuck in. Ben, you want to introduce our special guest?
Yep, thanks, Tom. Thanks for the intro. So I'd like to introduce Professor David Sumpter. David, if you want to start your video and join us.
Yep, there I am.
Welcome this evening or this morning where you are.
Yeah, well, it's this morning here. It's just after 9 o'clock, so starting my working day here.
Oh, I think we'll have a range of time zones joining this. So I know at least one person who's joining from Western Australia, which is 3 hours behind where we are, and it's 6 o'clock at night here. So opposite ends of the day.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to have you as a guest. So thanks for joining us.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you want to give a bit of a you've got some fascinating, like your background in terms of the different areas that you've studied. Would you like to give a bit of a?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, it's interesting. My starting point for all of this is I'm an applied mathematician. So I studied computer science and statistics at university. Then I went on and did a PhD in applied mathematics. But really from the start, I was always interested in different applications of mathematics. So I ended up studying honeybees, and I had a long collaboration with Sydney University. I've been in Sydney twice or 3 times actually, start working both with the people who work on honeybees, they work on ants, and work on locusts. So I've done all this kind of mathematical biology in the past, and a lot of that collaboration has been in Australia. So I've written lots of articles together with researchers there. And anyway, so yeah, how did I get into the football? Well, basically what happened is I wanted to communicate about my work on the ants and the bees and bird flocks and fish schools, which I'd worked on, And football became a very good vehicle for communicating that, because it has like lots of collective behavior. You know, you have the movement of the players together, and there's also lots of modeling questions that come into it. And so that was it's about 5 years ago. In fact, when I wrote, it's maybe 7 years ago now, because when I wrote the first beginnings of Soccermatics, I was sitting in Sydney University. I went for a coffee in the morning and would just sketch out a few ideas about that. And so then I moved away from math biology and started working on football. And part of that, I won't say that, you know, I'm not solely working in betting, as we're going to come into. In fact, I'm not working that much in betting, but you just can't get away from that, because you have to understand the randomness. And so now I work with a number of football clubs. I work with Ajax. I've worked with Barcelona before, working with a big Premier League club just now, helping them develop their analytics. And most of all, I work with Hammarby Football Club in Sweden, because I worked very closely together with the coaches there. So I've had this amazing journey from working with all these biologists now to working with all these football coaches and sports directors and so on.
Oh, it's interesting that I know in your book you described, you obviously had a passion. I really enjoyed the bit about rolling dice to predict the outcomes of soccer games when you're a kid. And when you were working on your different projects, did you have football like as a goal? Like obviously your passion was football more than insects, or?
Yeah, I have to be honest about that. I didn't really have that, you know, it wasn't like I was sitting there thinking I'll get these models, these insects modeled, and then I'll be able to work on football. No, I was just a kind of normally interested football fan, you know, when I'm, you know, that section where me and my friend, we used to play Subbuteo together. We wanted to have like the whole Premier League in Subbuteo after school. And so we played Subbuteo matches, but then we just kind of we ran out of time. So we started rolling the dice for the score. But then you know, that was a kind of starting point for me thinking about randomness. And a dice isn't a very good model for a football game. You know, don't really have that many 5-6 matches. But it is a good way of thinking about it, thinking and understanding that type of randomness. So no, I can't say that I always wanted to do it. And I always feel a little bit bad, actually, because to many people, and I get these emails all the time, I have their dream job, you know, working with football and numbers. And I sort of fell into it in a way. I was just interested in the mathematics and how you could model anything. And football just turned out to be one of the really good sports to do modeling in.
Yeah, and I think that I know from speaking to like a couple of people who used to work at Betfair Australia, who worked at AFL clubs, that soccer, as in football, is a better sport to model, or more predictable in some ways, less variables, I suppose, 18 players compared to 11. So soccer is better to model than AFL. And I think some sports lend themselves, have more easily modeled than other sports.
Less variance.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, AFL, I had a discussion about this, because that might be the one team sport that's more complex than soccer. But normally we're talking about baseball models are easier than soccer models, because you've got two players against each other, you've got some fielding decisions to make, but everything's very static and controlled. And then you can set up your model very nicely. Soccer becomes more complicated, and I made this statement once on Twitter that soccer was the most complicated team sport, and I got a load of AFL fans jumping on me about that, you know, like, this is much more complex, more players, more movement, different patterns, and so on. So yeah, I'm very careful about making that statement now.
And I think as I say, the drawing the analogy with baseball is a great example. I know after watching Moneyball and reading Moneyball, I tried to think about in terms of cricket, but even then I could see the differences in terms of more variables in cricket than in baseball. Whereas
Yeah, I haven't done any cricket modelling. Of course, I grew up in Scotland, but I had English parents, and so I was like the only person. Scotland, everyone hated cricket when I was growing up. It's not like it's kind of seen as a sort of imperialistic sport, and people don't. And you can't play it in Scotland because it's raining all the time. You think it rains in England, but it's raining all the time in Scotland. So yeah, I had an interest in cricket when I was younger, but I've never quite got into the modelling of that. It's just been soccer, I think, has been what's caught my imagination, and I've kept going with.
Oh no, I think it's great to be able to apply your two loves in terms of mathematics and soccer. And you mentioned with the betting, I thought I should mention as well, so the audience knows that you have tried your hand at automating via the API, just so that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very interested in talking to people about that more, because that was what really attracted me when you guys offered or asked me to do this talk, because I'd started doing something with the Betfair API, and I didn't really, I start lots of projects, to be honest, and I didn't really completely get into it. But we can talk a little bit more about some ideas I have about that, because I've made a couple of betting models before, and I'm going to talk about one of them. But I think that there's a lot of potential there for automating these types of betting systems using the API. And I started downloading your live odds and so on. I haven't quite finished. Other things got in the way.
Oh, there will definitely be music to the ears of our audience if they're mainly automated customers, so they'll be very interested to hear that. Cool. Should we talk about or touch on your Soccermatics course, because I know that's an amazing resource for people who are learning. I'll get Mitch to post a link to that course.
Yeah, sure. I can say something about that. I think that's one of my most recent projects. So during the lockdown, I have a group chat with some other analysts who work for different clubs, working for Manchester City, Barcelona, the German Federation, the English Federation, and the group chat's called Friends of Tracking. And we and this is to do with tracking data. So you follow the data, follow the positions of the player. And we were trying to get projects done in tracking data. And Javier Fernandez, who works for Barcelona, and now he's moved on, but he was working for Barcelona at the time. He had the idea that, well, we should give back to the community and set up some videos where we talk about our work and explain what we do and so on. And basically, we did that, and there was you can look up these Friends of Tracking videos. But over time I talked, and then the university said, well, why aren't you teaching this? You're online talking about this. Why aren't you teaching it too? And so they helped me set up a course. And so now we have a course which you can come to as a foreign student. If you're sitting in Australia, you can enroll. You have to pay for it if you're from Australia. It's free to EU citizens. So not to British. I got a lot of angry British people don't seem to understand about Brexit. They're sending me emails, well, I'm British. It's like, no, sorry. So not. But if you've got a European passport, then this is a free course. And what I've done is I've made in any case, even if you can't register for the course, I've made all of the teaching materials free online. And I think if you can put in let me have a quick look on this one. I can
because it's amazing.
I can just show you a little bit about how I set it, because I got really into it as well. Like just setting up is much easier to set. I used Read the Docs, which is a kind of documentation package where you can put in some videos. That's me presenting on the first one. Just some of the things. This is from the Soccermatics book, from the original Soccermatics book, but some other stuff that I'm doing with my company 12 Football, illustrating passes, how to build a passing network. And we've actually got code which goes through all of these things step by step. So how you plot passes, all the Python code for that. And I'm going to emphasize this quite a lot, that I know there's discussion about if you should use R or Python. That doesn't really matter so much, but you really, in the modern age, need to have the programming skills in Python, because that's where all the data science tools are. And yeah, this is just plotting a few passes for the match. And then I've tried to cover as much as possible. So this is to be honest, this is what we do at 12 Football, the company I run for different clubs. And I've just made a course of how it all works and the sorts of services we offer, and how to implement them as well, and all the code to implement them. So I'm sure you've all heard of expected goals. So I've got videos going through the expected goals, and then text explaining this is how you load in the data to make an expected goals model, and how you can build your own expected goals model.
It's amazing, an amazing resource. I know when I first looked at it, I was for someone like me who, I've tried or completed various uni subjects that sort of touch on or go through programming, but they only touch on different sports, and you jump around so much, you don't learn, I suppose, that in-depth learning in one area, whereas this allows both learning about football analytics, but also the programming side of things, allows you to improve your programming skills, especially for people. I suppose I've probably skewed because I have more of an interest in sport or soccer, let's say, compared to some other topics. But yeah, I just thought it was amazing.
So I found that, I've got quite a lot of students who aren't that obsessed with football who are doing the course. So it's also available to the Uppsala University course, and there's a range of different students. And I think the thing that helps compared to other maths courses is it's concrete, that you like this is something that's happening that you're trying to model. And a lot of the time when you're doing maths courses, it's just like, solve this equation, fit this line through data, and you don't really have any engagement or care about it. But when it's like, and that's what, when I said do the course for the students, it's like you're in charge of Arsenal now, and you've got to like plan out Arsenal season. What are Arsenal doing? How do Arsenal need to strengthen themselves? And argue that for me in data, and then it becomes a much more engaging project.
David, do all football teams use analytics like this?
I'd say no. I think, it's been an eye-opener for me. So there's some very leading clubs in this. Liverpool are one of the leading ones. Because they were so successful, they had a slightly smaller budget, very successful in their recruitment strategy. So other clubs are starting to take notice. Brighton and Brentford, anyone who knows anything about the gambling industry knows that those guys know their stuff and they know their numbers, and it's no surprise that those two have suddenly been so successful. Both of them bought by bookmakers. Both of them have climbed slowly but steadily up the league. I think Brighton is sixth. They were unlucky. They had 19 shots apparently yesterday, unlucky to get a 0-0 draw. Oh, wow. So they've really proved themselves. And they're doing analytics on everything. So they were ready to sell their manager, right? So that's kind of like their manager. They recruited him to fit in their style of play, but they're thinking like, we can push this manager up, and everything's like sort of analytical and developing somebody. So it's not like losing your manager for Brighton. It's kind of, you take in a manager, you get them to do this, and then you put them up to the next stage. And that's everything in those clubs is thinking around those ways.
Wow. Yeah. I was going to mention like Brentford, I'd read a little bit about, and in terms of and it was also the Danish team that they owned, and how
Midtjylland, yes,
and amazing the analytics that they used, and that they were to find identify talent, a broad range of things.
Well, I mean, one thing, so it's definitely the case that analytics, but one thing we always find difficult, like in proving analytics works, is that football, unfortunately, in many cases, is very unprofessional. And so it's basically, there's a kind of whole process of professionalization where things are sort of done in a structured way. And part of that is analytics. So it's the clubs who have actually started to work in a much more structured way who also do the analytics. And so it's the whole club moving forward in that way. But definitely those numbers are a big part of it.
And I suppose you still have to allow for that for the talent that doesn't come up under the in terms of analytics, the raw talent that I was just trying to think of someone off the top of my head, and I was thinking maybe Wayne Rooney or someone like that from years ago.
Defies the numbers. Well, it is different. I mean, you know, he made his breakthrough when he was 16, and it's difficult to get numbers for those players. So that's definitely, you have to think about where your level is with numbers. And there's also another thing. It's a kind of middle ground. So Brentford and Brighton are perfect examples of where analytics is very useful. But when you get up to the very big clubs, your problem again becomes that there's only a small number of players. Everyone knows the world-class players, right? So those edges are much more difficult to find. And that's why Liverpool is such a good example, because they managed to do that. Because they could, they were very clear, they could sort of take off 20 million from their transfer fees using analytics. And the gains, I mean, the gains to pay someone to do analytics, it doesn't cost that much compared to the millions you can save in your transfer budget. So yeah, it's getting that balance right between, and it's not always numbers as well, as you say. That's sometimes there's just these things happen, and you can't really control them.
Oh, I can imagine. Yeah, no, definitely. Actually, first, should we go over? I'm just looking. We're already 20 minutes in. Did you want to start? Do we want to run or start with one of the presentations that you had?
Yeah, sure. I just thought it might be fun. So I did. This is a thing I did for my my most recent book, The 10 Equations, and I thought I might just give you a little test to break the ice here. So. I'm interested to hear how you do that. When I ask this to a general audience, there's not always a good performance on this one, but we'll try it on you. So I've got the English. I don't know in Australia which odds form you use. Do you use the English odds or the European odds, or the what's the most typical one?
Decimal.
Okay. So this so you're offered 3 to 2. So this is the English odds. So this is 3 to 2 means that a £2 bet will give a £3 profit. So this would be 1.5, I suppose. Or is it 2.5? Wait a minute. It's 2.5, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, it's 2.5. Exactly. I have to get this right, because 3 over 2 is 1.5. So this is 2.5. So a £2 bet will give a £3 profit if England win, and a £2 loss if they don't win. And so here's the question. If the probability that England win is 1 in 3, is this a good bet? And I think you had a poll set up there. Do you think you can get that going?
That works.
Yeah, there you go. Good. So if you can all have a little go at that bet, I'll be interested. Just off the top of your head, no calculations here. I don't want people, it's just like...
What a smart audience, David.
Yeah.
Okay, you guys, I can't see how it's how the vote's going, so maybe most people have filled in now.
Another 10 seconds.
Okay.
See if we get a few more votes. It's definitely skewed in one direction.
Oh, well, that's good, because I can say that this when I do this with a general all right, it's very skewed in one direction. Wow, this is a good bet. Okay. I'm sorry about that.
Oh,
you guys don't have a smart bet.
Oh, sorry, no, this isn't a good bet. Sorry, no. Sorry, this isn't a good bet. Yeah, of course you got it right. Okay. It's too early in the morning for me. Yeah, so this isn't a good bet. Expected profit is -1/3. So you're spot on there. When I do this for a general audience, I tend to get a 50-50 split there. So I think people tend to be guessing at random. So you've definitely got that one. And the way you know this, and this is why I'm asking this question, the way you know this is, if you do the maths, is looking at the expected profit, right? So there's a 1 in 3 chance that you get a payoff of £3. This is a £3 profit. And there's a 2 in 3 chance that you lose £2. So this is the negative part of this. And so then you're left with 1, where 3 divided by 3 is 1. And 2 times 2 is 4 divided by 3, and you're left with a -1/3 profit. So you'll lose 33.33 pence on average. So, and I'm not going to make you do this one, because this is the one that is a good bet. And if you get, if the probability is 1 in 2, then it is a good bet, right? So I think most of you have got that. but what I want to go on to from here is I want to say that, well, what's a fair bet? Now, a fair bet, you're called Betfair as well. So that's that, I think, and that is your idea, is to offer as fair a bet as possible. And I like this. So this is a fair bet. And a fair bet is, we look to see what is the probability P when the profit is 0. So here I had one in the first one, I had 1 in 3. In this one, I put into the equation. And then I have 1 in 2. And I think this is often where people find the maths, they find the step up in maths really here, where you go from talking about numbers to talking about letters. But when you want to work out a fair bet, what you do is you put in this value P, and that P is the probability that England win. And then you solve that equation equal to 0. So here, instead of 1/3, I've put P, and then I can just rewrite this 5 times P here, 2 times P here, and then I have this solution here. And I solve this, and I find that this is a fair bet when the probability of winning is 2 in 5. So I'm hoping everyone's following up to now.
Yep, I think we're good.
Yeah, and then okay, but then let's take it one more step, and then let's take the odds now, and we make the odds X and the probability of winning P. Now we've got no numbers left in this. We're only doing the algebra. And now we have the following equation. So I've taken the 3 and the 2 and replaced them by, oh yeah, so I've cheated a little bit. I've normalized this, but I've said this is the, yeah, so I've moved this X around a little bit here, but this is the, if the odds are X for the favorite winning, then you'll have this as your expected profit. And now we do a bit of algebra, and we rearrange this equation to get the following equation. And this is for fair, when you have fair odds, you have this P equals 1 divided by 1 plus X. And this is your fair odds equation.
Yep, that works.
Again, I think many of you will be familiar with this step, but here is the key betting step. So, oh yeah, let's just plot this, right? So this is what it looks like. So these are your bookmakers' odds in the English odds format. And this is the frequency at which your team will win. And this is the equation P equals 1 over 1 plus X. Notice I've used a log scale here. Probably from Corona, you're all familiar with log scales now, but this is a log scale in the opposite direction. So there's a log, so this is a 1 over 10. This is a strong favorite. This is a narrow favorite. This is evens here, 1, 1. And now here's the trick. So if everything's fine, then the odds should follow this line. And what we did, this is a project I did together with 2 young gamblers, Marius and Jan, is we took odds from previous World Cups. So we did this for the last World Cup. And we took odds from previous World Cups and we plotted them. And the plot looked something like this. These are the dots now, given the bookmakers' odds for the actual results. So this is the data. And then this is the line, the P equals 1 over 1 plus X line compared to the data.
Ooh.
And this, I think, for me, this is the first step for making any gambling model. Before you start to think about like expected goals or team performance or anything, you want to look to see if there's any of these biases in the odds of this type. And what you actually see is very, very slightly in these odds, the bookmakers' odds slightly underestimate the favorite odds. And this is something called the long shot bias, which is very common in this. And it's particularly common, it seems, in the World Cup.
Yeah.
But then there's one other thing. There's something called where they overestimate favorites with longer odds. So this is a probability of winning. So it doesn't include the draw or the loss probability. But here are some favorites which have longer odds, but they're kind of overestimated by the market. So this, anywhere where you deviate from the line, that's the point where you can exploit things and make a profit. And here is what you do. So here is my original equation, P equals 1 over 1 plus X. And now I'm going to introduce two parameters. So some of my students say, I've already said this, that maths gets more difficult when you go from numbers over to letters. And one of my students said to me once that they knew when it was going to get really hard maths because I got out the Greek letters. And so now I'm getting out the Greek letters. But what I've done is I've said, well, wait a minute. This line doesn't go perfectly through the data, the p equals 1 over 1 plus x line. Can I sort of squish this line a bit to make it go through the data? And that's what you're doing with this thing here. So when alpha is equal to 1 and beta is equal to 1, we just have the original equation, 1 over 1 plus x. But if I can move alpha and beta around, I can squish this line. And that's what I've done here. And this is what's called logistic regression. And logistic regression finds these alpha and beta parameters which move the line so that it goes better through the data. And it's this equation, if we look at previous matches, that performs better than the bookmakers' odds. And again, what I find fascinating about this is there's nothing to do with the game of football in this. It's all like taking the odds, finding a bias in the odds, and then managing to fit that and capture that in these two parameters. And we did this during the, oh yeah, I wanted to show you this I wanted just to very quickly show you in Python how this looks.
Yeah, no, that sounds great.
Share my screen. Because I have the code here. So, I mean, this is what I wrote at the time. I mean, it's not going to be the nicest code I've ever seen because it's just something like I wrote down to try and solve this problem. But we load in the odds. And I use a package called stats models, which you find inside Python, and it allows you to make the fitting. And most of this is just kind of changing the odds into different forms that I'd like to use. But then here is where I fit the model. So I'm using this generalized linear model. I'm fitting. Here it's called binomial, but it's logistic regression that I'm doing to make this fit. And I'm fitting various models to this data. And then what I do once I've plotted the model, so if you look up here in the top right, can I bring this across, make it a bit bigger here?
Yeah, doesn't want to play friendly.
What I'll do is I'll just, if I can share the Python, then that gets better. So up there you can see this is two different fitted lines here actually. And this is really interesting, I thought, because this, if the odds are perfect, if there's no bias in this one, it's a straight line, right? So there's a straight line if it's perfect and there's no bias. A wiggly line tells you where the bias is that you can exploit. So fair odds on the blue line, unfair odds which you can exploit are on the green line or the orange line. And what we found for the World Cup, and I think this is really interesting for you guys going into the World Cup, is that the opening odds had less bias in them than the closing odds.
Wow.
And so if you pick out the opening odds even now, because odds have to be set very early for the World Cup, you've got experts setting those odds, right? And they know a little bit more about football than the other people who are going to be coming into the markets very soon, wanting to back their team basically, or back against another team that they hate, another country they hate. You know, that's the sort of thing that's coming into the market. And we could actually find that the bias increased from the green line, where the opening odds were reasonably, there was still a small bias in them, but reasonably fair, to quite a big bias in the closing odds. And so we used the opening odds to construct a model, also adjusting for this bias. And then we bet on the closing odds. And we made a nice, I can't remember we took a, I need to get back onto this one. But we put £50 bets on all of the matches our model recommended, and we made £200 from £1,400 worth of bets. Now there's a lot of luck involved. You know, this isn't the high frequency trading some people might have been up to. Definitely a bit of luck in it. But I thought it was a very nice study to look at the just to look at the methods behind that. And I think I'll skip. There's some examples there, but I can, if you want to go through it, then that I can go.
Oh, if you want, I think that, yeah, everyone would be interested, because it's amazing to see, like we can, Australian, New Zealand customers, Betfair customers know that we've got, if they're after historical data, we've got that they can, the prices, and they can look at them over time in terms of they're from the start of when the market opens to when the market closes. So they can look at them over time and see the changes and see if they can find some inequalities.
And a lot of the opening markets will be done by data, right, and analytics. So
So I think, typical, that's also, I mean, a lot of them will be done by, but the World Cup is a difficult pricing. I mean, Premier League, you can price it with expected goals quite well. And get a good model. World Cup can be a bit more difficult. In fact, I work with the English FA, and it's really impossible for them because they, I think, somebody, like, they've lost their matches, right? They've lost but nobody really, they call it this Europa thing. They don't really care about it as much as the World Cup. No one cares about it as much as the World Cup. So it's very difficult to use the form of the teams to do that. And so I think a lot of that pricing will be done by experts. It will be done based on previous tournaments and so on. But that pricing, from what we found out, that pricing is pretty good. It always has a bit of that long shot bias, because the bookmakers always nobody's interested in that like 1.1 bet or the 1.05 bet. They're no fun for most people, but that's the one that's going to be there. And so there's a small bias in there, but those odds are pretty good, and it's using them to beat the punters later on was the key to that particular method. I looked, I mean, I can tell you about another. So I've fitted I fitted other models similar to this using these types of principles, and I found draws in the Premier League when I was working on this for Soccermatics. That was the bet that I found there worked well there. It was draws in the Premier League. Was between very strong teams. So again, I could see the statistical bias that when Chelsea and Arsenal play, nobody thinks there's going to be a draw, but a draw is a much more common result. That turned out that worked for about sort of 6 or 7 years, but recently that hasn't been a good strategy, and I'm not exactly sure what's changed to not make that a good strategy. But this is just, I mean, these are very basic ones, just based on odds. You don't need anything more to get these things to work.
Yeah, and I think that's great advice to starting out, but not necessarily to be needing overly complex data, starting out with, and looking from a high level before you start digging in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was for me, and from a mathematical point of view, this is really beautiful, because we go from a numerical example, which you guys all got right. I seem to slip up on it, but you guys all got the numerical one right. And then you start to like introduce letters, and then you end up with this general equation. And then you say, well, how can I twist this general equation a bit in order to find that bias? And there's lots of you can get out your calculus books and look for other functional forms that might be able to fit the data, and you can just start to sort of see. And, we talk a lot about neural networks and machine learning and all of this type. This is just the basic of machine learning. This is the first machine learning model that I teach when I'm teaching machine learning at the university, logistic regression. And neural networks are really, they're doing this, but they're fitting much more complicated functional forms, and you get a risk there, because what you guys don't want to do is overfit. You want to pick out that pattern. But so what I like about this method is that you have these alpha beta parameters, you know what they mean in terms of we can squeeze things and you can say things about that. And that was very important when Marius and Jan and I were doing this model, is we should be able to explain what happens in the end. So we use logistic regression rather than more complicated neural networks in order to get that explanation. I made a few, I can go back to that later, but I made a few, this is what I would say is the sort of starter pack of this type of approach. You have to download Python, get some skills in that, and that's definitely in my Soccermatics course. scikit-learn is the one for doing neural networks, and I use this one called stats model, which is more for doing the traditional logistic regression and so on.
And we've had a question. Sorry, it came in a little while ago. I was just waiting. This is probably a good point to ask it. Someone's asked, is it possible to take the Socomatics course even if you're not a university student? And they said they studied a Bachelor in Science in math 5 years ago.
Yeah, so actually for the university version, you have to have a calculus course, a probability course, and an algebra course. And if you've done a maths degree, you've definitely got them. So we're talking like the first year university. So the kind of courses that an engineering student does at university in these. So we do have those requirements. Of course, to take it online, you can just try and get started and pick things up along the way, and there's some resources there. But to do it as a university course, that's the resources that's for.
Brilliant. No, I think that's, and I think it mentions on the website that if you don't want to do it officially, if you just want to do the course, you can do it. And I think there's a team project or something at the end though that you recommend joining.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a Slack group where you can go in and join up. And so 2 years ago, we had a group of students, mainly from Brazil, who did it themselves and organized everything themselves, and they did the group project together. They managed PSG and came up with an analysis of the team and so on. And what was really cool about that is that three of those guys are now working for 3 of the top clubs in Brazil. Wow. Doing their data analytics. They all got jobs at different clubs. And that really, because doing it yourself obviously shows a bit more, well, a bit extra kind of drive and so on. And so now that's really revolutionized Brazilians football analytics. The club's really bought into this, and they're employing people, and they're continuing working on this. So yeah, it's definitely possible to do it through the Slack group. And there's a group of people just starting now doing the project. So if you get into the Slack group, which I think there's a link for, I might have to update the link actually, because I think they run out after 30 days, but I'll update the link and make sure you can get into that.
And when I look through the Socomatics website, it's listed in there. So I'm sure that they'll be able to find it or contact via through the website and be able to find out more information and let you know if the Slack link needs updating.
Yeah.
And I suppose we've covered off, like the first broad question I had was, where should aspiring modelers start? And I think you've answered it there in detail with the starting with the odds, and especially for the World Cup. Do you have any suggestions on other data sources? I think when we chatted,
I think the go-to source for me, I've got it up here I'll put up the slide for you. The go-to source for me is now I've got the advert in Swedish coming up here, but it's football-data.co.uk, which is an amazing resource of historical data. It's got historical data on all the leagues, and it's got the odds from various different data sources, and the score lines, halftime score lines. And that's where you would get started. If you want to do the type of model that I talked about just now, that is where you would get started for that. So definitely have a look at footballdata.co.uk. And I think probably, the API you guys have got is very useful for that. I don't know to what degree you do historical data. These guys, this footballdata.co.uk have back for sort of 20 years of betting odds.
Yeah, I didn't. Oh.
And I've looked for these types of. I didn't mention this also, that I think there's a kind of important part of this is that Marius and Jan, who I worked with on this during 2019. So we worked in 2018 on the World Cup, but they took this project further. I don't know. Sometimes I regret, I moved on to the less paid world of actually working with football clubs, where they, despite the big possibilities, they don't pay you very well. But Jan and Marius basically traveled around the world, and during that time they made 838,000 euros wow. using over 100,000 $100 euro bets. So definitely some numbers to think about there, right? Automated trading. I mean, obviously they don't sit there and put on 100,000 bets themselves. They're using automated trading. And this is less than 1% profit per bet. So really important to be aware of that.
Probably a more realistic return over time in terms of.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's where you're lying really with those types of things. And I think it becomes, I look at this quite a lot in my book, The 10 Equations, about like how long you need to know until your strategy is really working. And it's a dangerous long amount of time. It's like 2,000 bets until you can start to get a really good feel of if your model is actually working or not. And so what a lot of their job was collecting the right data sources. They made up their own database of lots and lots of different leagues. And they found things like, so yeah, what were they doing in practice? They told me one example was that Germans are very pessimistic. So betting on the German league, Germans always think that every game's going to end 1-0. Well, Brazilians apparently, and South Americans in general, were very over-optimistic. So they thought there would be very high-scoring matches. And when they looked at over-under bets, they were sort of taking the extremes. And so they found those biases for different leagues. They looked at one league at a time. Where were the biases lying? And then they started to make strategies based on that.
Well, would some, I suppose, subject matter knowledge help there in terms of knowing what the trends in personalities or like some generalizations there assist with that?
I think it's difficult because, yeah, I mean, Marius in particular was the person who always wanted an explanation of why that could be the case. And I'm not sure, it seems that, but explanation in that case tended to be, sort of racial stereotype in some way. And so I'm not sure they always work out. I think there is a balance though. If you get a statistical model and it makes no sense at all, I think that's really important to be cautious. Like we talk about this in mathematical modeling, we talk about this as your prior information. And if you have a model which is very contradictory to what you would have thought before you fitted the model, then you should be pretty careful about the conclusions that you draw from that model. And so they worked mainly with statistical models, finding these little biases, but they always tried to keep their eye on, does this make sense? Why is this happening? Can I make an explanation of this? And that's what going back to the World Cup one, that was, oh yeah, no, the one I showed in Python there, that was one that that made sense, right? So we could see that it makes sense that the World Cup is suddenly a place where people who aren't normally gambling come in and want to have a little flutter, and they really don't know what they're doing, and you can actually use the starting odds to beat them on this.
Yeah, there's enough interest from people without that or not smart money that can cause that inequality in the odds that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, exactly.
Was the other thing I think we mentioned when we were chatting, expected threat? Did you have?
Yeah, because I would say if there's something I want to sell to anyone who's really into doing live betting. So this is one for the live gambling idea. So if you're using the Betfair, and that's why I started like looking at your live odds service. But there's let me just give I think I've got yeah, it's this one. Because let me just tell you what I was thinking about with this. And so you'll have heard of expected goals, and this is the idea that basically the nearer you are to shooting at the goal, the bigger the chance you are to score. So it kind of models the quality of chances. But what we've been working on is an idea called expected threat. And the idea is that any action can be evaluated in how it increases the probability of scoring. So passes in your own half, the scores you see here, they should be somehow thought of in the following way: that 1,000 is a goal, right? So scoring a goal is 1,000 points, and anything less than that. So a defensive action like that was a 2.6% chance of scoring. A pass like this will normally just be a 0.6% increase. Now 1.2% increase in chance of scoring. Dribble is 2.4% increase. Pass is 5.6% increase. We have that on a very high expected goals, that one. Unlucky missing that one, I suppose, is what you would normally say.
In the box.
But what we're doing really is the expected threat idea is to take the expected goals idea and evaluate every action. And the way we do that is, and this is what we do with 12, is we take all of the possession chains that contain a certain type of pass. And so you'll have lots of chains that go through this this particular point. And then we use a machine learning model to predict the probability that a pass like this will typically lead to goal. And this is a very good pass. And we maybe think that, we estimate using the model that 10% of the times a pass like this is played, it leads to a goal. And then the expected threat is 10%. So we can, for any action, we can look to see, well, what is the probability it leads to goal? And there's different things you can include in this data. Here, we're just really including the X and Y coordinates of it, but there's other things. If it's a through ball, if it's a cross, you can also make models where you have the opposition players, the positions of them. But we can create that model, which gives us expected threat value, which is basically the probability of scoring.
Wow.
And where I think there's an interesting, sorry, do you have a question? Or
no, I was just,
I'll just tell you where I think, I mean, I'll give you what first, just a quick example of how you can do this. So and this is more the way we actually work with clubs, is that they might be interested in signing a player, and they might be interested to know where he or she is dangerous in different areas. So here we have Declan Rice, and he's producing 0.23 expected threat from this area, 0.19 from this area. So these are his hotspot areas, so to speak. And that allows you to look at the style of the player. But where there might be a betting thing, I think, is in plots like this. This is a kind of moving average of expected threat through time. What I'm very interested in is, would it be, so this tells you, well, Liverpool were dominating here. This match actually ended up 5-0 to Liverpool, but it's Liverpool are definitely dominating here. Does that help you above and beyond the odds to predict when the next goal is going to come? And I think it can go either way. I think if you've got people watching the match, they might be getting very excited during this period and backing Liverpool very strongly. But it might be the case that, well, there's always going to be breakaway and goals scored by other teams. So maybe it's actually Manchester United who are going to score in this situation. So, but there's definitely for using those regression models, there's some opportunity there for getting a bit of an edge, I think.
That's great. Yeah. And I think trying to get that, I suppose the complexity of getting that expected threat data and intertwining it with the odds.
Well, yeah. So there, if you are interested, so first of all, we have an app there where you can download and you can find out the expected goals of the players. And when we do this live during the match, and it's all that's why we had the 1,000 points at the start. It's all presented as a game essentially, and it's a fantasy game. So it's a fun game to play, and you can challenge me on this one, and go on that. But if you're interested in access to the API for Live XT, then send us an email at hello@12.football. And we can see if we can set you up with live access to XT.
That's great.
If you'd like to try that type of project.
Mitch, would you be able to share that email? Maybe it's getting near the end. Maybe if you're going to share it in Slack.
Yeah, I'll put it in
the Slack group, and then
in the Slack as well.
Then. People will be have more of a chance to be able to
no, I can't
have a look in detail and email.
Yeah.
That's, I think Mitch has got it. Yeah.
Cool.
hello@12.football. Otherwise, I can share that after.
Yeah, so that was one of the projects. I don't know. I might, like, Jan and Marius went off and made 900,000 euros last time I gave them a.
Yes, it could be valuable advice.
But well, they put. I mean, the thing is that it's a lot of work, right? So often people ask me about this, especially when they hear that you can make, almost €1 million. The thing is that they work full time with it.
Yeah.
And they started a company and they really invested in this stuff. And so it's a job, and I'm not sure they would get paid more being a quant in London or whatever. It's difficult to know that balance, but it is a lot of work to do these types of things as well.
And yeah, it's a big time investment in terms of it'd be hard to do with a small amount of time. It's sort of can invest a lot of hours per week, or like I'm sure that they do, or I know from a lot of people I've spoken to that it's big hours at certain times, and it's 100% commitment. I say 100% because having read Socomatics with the terminology rather than saying 110%.
Not saying 110.
Yeah. They're those times where you have to work, and you can't just can't have time off a certain. It's a lot of commitment.
Yeah, it's lots of fun though too.
Yes, yeah, and definitely if you end up being that profitable, it'd be really good. I should also mention we've only just sort of this week we've finalized. We're going to do a World Cup datathon that we ran one 4 years ago, but we're just going to do a smaller one this time than previous. But we'll be just let everyone know that we'll be sharing more details in Slack next Wednesday. So we should have the official entry form and some more concrete details. But I can confirm that we are running a smaller one and more for our quantitative customers that. I know there's been a bit of talk and a few questions that we've had, so definitely something that's in demand. So they can we'll be supplying plenty of data for them to be able to model, and maybe even take some of the advice that you've given tonight, David, to it when they're looking at ways to things to implement within their models.
Yeah.
Well, thanks so much. It's actually right on time. Thanks so much for joining us and for making the time tonight. Oh, this morning for you, David.
No problem.
It's been brilliant, and I think if I get any questions, like people feel free, like anyone watching who or watching the recording has questions, feel free to email through to automation@betfair.com.au, and then and we can always, if we can't answer them, I'm sure David can help out if they're related to Socomatics or football.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks again, David, and I hope you have a good day. It's the start of your day, so hopefully this has started you off in good stead.
Yeah, no, it will do. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to talk about this, and I'm hoping that now my head's going around thinking about expected threat betting opportunities. So I'm interested to hear if anyone comes up with something. So please do get in touch and tell me about any ideas that you have with that.
Now, I'm definitely gonna have a look into it. And I think as we wrap up, we normally say, or make sure if you are gambling, gamble responsibly. And especially given the week it is here with Gambling Harm Awareness Week. And thank you all for attending, and we will speak to you soon. Thanks, David.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Thanks.